Days at the Morisaki Bookshop, Chapter 4. Takako, you still up? One night at the end of summer, my uncle called out to me from the other side of the sliding door. When I looked at the clock, I saw it was 8 o'clock, closing time for the bookshop. I'm sleeping, I said from under the covers. Come on, people who are sleeping can't answer back like that. But I am sleeping, because I'm what'd you call me? A sleep monster, remember? I heard him laugh through the door. Are you angry? He said. I talked to Sabu. I am angry. You said I was like a monster. Well, I was worried about you, so I talked to him. He's worried about you too. Come on, don't you want to go outside? There's a place I want to take you. How about it? I'm fine, I replied, facing the sliding door. But my uncle persisted. Trust me, you won't regret it. And then I promise I won't interfere anymore with your sleeping. For real? I asked warily. Pinky swear. If I'm lying, you can hit me 300 times. That's a promise. When I glared at him through the little gap in the sliding door, I saw him smiling and nodding. I promise. The place he wanted to take me was just a stone's throw from the Morisaki bookshop. We're here, he said, coming to a halt in front of a storefront on a little back street. It was an old wooden coffee shop that I didn't think I'd ever noticed before. An extremely elegant, middle-aged man with a mustache seemed to be the man in charge. The name of the coffee shop, Saveur, lit up by the sign, seemed to float above the dark haze. This is my spot, he said. As soon as my uncle heaved open the heavy door, we could smell the rich aroma of coffee. The man pouring boiling water into a special siphon placed on the counter greeted us as we came in. Hey, this is my niece, Takako. I took a seat next to my uncle at the small counter and gave a quick bow. Even without the moustache, the owner's slender, refined face would have been quite dignified. He was probably in his late 40s. I wished my uncle, who looked like a kid no matter how old he got, would follow his example. A blend for me. How about you, Takako? Me too. I turned and looked around inside. It felt so peaceful there. The interior was lit by soft lanterns. Gentle piano music was playing. The blackened brick wall was covered with doodles and graffiti from past customers. All of it fit together beautifully and matched the warm, soothing ambience of the coffee shop. It's so nice here, I thought. For the first time in a long time, I felt joy well up inside me, and I felt a little bit better, a little less tired. This place has been around for 50 years, my uncle explained. In the old days, a lot of famous people used to come here. Wow, I'm sure it wasn't easy to create an atmosphere like this, I said, nodding deeply. It's so calming. Around 5 minutes later, a waitress brought us our coffee. Good evening, Mr. Morisaki. Hey, Tomo, this is my niece, Takako. Nice to meet you, I said, bowing. Tomo smiled and said hello. Tomo's one of our regular customers, my uncle said. She's a true reader. Oh, I'm nothing special, she said, smiling shyly. She was about my age, maybe a little younger. She had fair skin and round, full cheeks. There was something gentle about her way of speaking, and she looked cute in her black apron. I had a feeling we might get along. My mood brightened. What's the deal, Takako? You prefer girls? There are young guys here too. My uncle waved to the other end of the counter. Hey, Takano! A tall, thin young man promptly popped his head through a gap in the curtain from the kitchen. Takano, why don't you take my niece out on a date sometime? Hey! I shouted and slapped my uncle's hand. Takano seemed pretty shy. That's all it took for his face to turn completely red. Takano has been training here so he can open his own cafe someday, but all he does is screw up, so the owner's constantly yelling at him. My uncle looked genuinely happy as he said the part about being yelled at. Let's not start tarnishing his reputation, the owner interjected. I felt bad for Takano, but he looked so unsteady on his feet that you could knock him over with a little push. He ended up inadvertently confirming what my uncle had said. My uncle was still in a good mood afterward. A middle-aged woman sitting nearby called out, Hey, Satoru! Oh, Mrs. Shibamoto, he said, and went over to her with his tail wagging. Then someone else at another table called out his name, and he quickly moved over to them. At the bookshop, my uncle kept things more under control, but take one step outside and he was totally different. I sighed, feeling like a dog owner being dragged around by her pet. Satoru's a popular guy around here. The cafe owner laughed wryly. When he smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes made him look kind. He's very friendly, if nothing else, I said sarcastically. But this truly is the first time I've ever had coffee this good, and I love the feel of this place. It's wonderful. The owner gave a soft laugh. Thank you very much. When young people come here for the first time, they see it with fresh eyes. That means a lot to me. It's Takako, right? Are you new to the area? This is my first time. I just started living at my uncle's store, at the Morisaki bookshop. That's a great spot. I really hope you enjoy life in Jimbocho. I made a face and groaned a little. What's wrong? My uncle says the same thing. That makes sense. No one loves this neighborhood more than your uncle. I groaned again. I'm not sure I get it, but I wasn't lying when I said your cafe was wonderful. I definitely want to come back. Anytime, he said and gave me a big smile. We stayed so long at the cafe that when we left it was late in the evening. My uncle and I strolled around the neighborhood, just wandering. The night breeze was cool against my face. It already felt like autumn. My uncle seemed drunk from the one beer he'd ordered. He walked ahead of me, stumbling a little and mumbling about what a nice night it was. I realized then that it was the first time we'd gone for a walk together like this since my childhood. Back then, we would walk all day long near my grandfather's house, hand in hand, pretending we were exploring. Why was that so much fun? I was always giggling with excitement. In those days, my uncle always seemed more like a sweet older brother. I guess it's natural for an only child, especially one like me, so wrapped up in her own thoughts, to be so excited to be spending time with someone like that. As my mind drifted back to that time, vivid memories returned to me. The two of us in his messy little room, him playing Beatles songs terribly on the guitar, and both of us singing. Or spending hours reading Osamu Tezuka and Shotaro Ishinomori, totally engrossed in manga. These memories made me start to feel a little bit of that same closeness to my uncle again as he walked ahead of me. Uncle Satoru? His back was to me when I called out to him. Yeah? My uncle turned and stared at me with those boyish eyes. What were you doing when you were my age? I guess I just read all the time. That's all? I felt a little disappointed. That doesn't seem that very different from now. That plus traveling. Traveling? Yeah, I would work a little here in Japan, save up some money, that kind of thing. Then I'd backpack around. I went to all kinds of places. Thailand, Laos, Vietnam, India, Nepal. I even went across Europe. The idea that my uncle had been so adventurous amazed me. What made you want to do that? Didn't you think about getting a regular job? He folded his arms and spoke slowly, as if he was thinking back on that period of his life. The short version is, I wanted to see the whole world for myself. I wanted to see the whole range of possibilities. Your life is yours. It doesn't belong to anyone else. I wanted to know what it would mean to live life on my own terms. I found myself nodding, but it seemed like a bit of a contradiction to escape Japan and go off in search of the possibilities for your life, only to end up running the bookstore. Still, listening to him talk, I realized just how different he was from the image of him I'd been holding on to since childhood. Now that I'm an adult, I think I can understand a little bit of what he felt then. In college, I used to dream about living a life that felt true to my own values, my own sense of things. Of course, when it came time to act on that in the real world, I found I just didn't have the courage. That might have been the secret to why he was able to be so wild and free. I felt a little jealous of him. Well, I guess I spent my 20s drifting around like that. My father was always getting angry at me. And then, one day in the midst of all this, he dropped dead. And I ended up taking over the store for him. Do you regret it? Not at all, he said, smiling. There's no job that suits me better than this one. For someone who loves books, there's no place more wonderful than here. I'm proud to have a shop here. I can't thank my father and grandfather enough, really. That's great. What is? My uncle looked at me with a confused expression. That you're doing what you want and you're making a living at it. That's not really true. I resisted it a lot in the beginning. I mean, taking over the store from my father wasn't exactly what I dreamt of doing when I was young. Even now, I still go back and forth all the time. But I don't know. Maybe it takes a long time to figure out what you're truly searching for. Maybe you spend your whole life just to figure out a small part of it. I don't know. I think maybe I've been wasting my time, just doing nothing. I don't think so. It's important to stand still sometimes. Think of it as a little rest in the long journey of your life. This is your harbour, and your boat is just dropping anchor here for a little while, and after you're well rested, you can set sail again. You're saying that now, but then you complain when I'm sleeping, I said spitefully. He laughed. Human beings are full of contradictions. I was pouting without realizing it. Especially this guy, I thought. So when you were traveling around and reading all those books, you must have learned a lot, right? It's funny. No matter where you go or how many books you read, you still know nothing. You haven't seen anything. And that's life. We live our lives trying to find our way. It's like that Santoka Taneda poem, the one that goes on, in and still the blue-green mountains. Uncle, I thought that this might be my opportunity to ask the question I'd been wanting to ask him all along. Yeah? Why did Aunt Momoko leave? She and I have the same way of looking at things. It's what brought us together, and I think it's also the reason we split up. We met in the middle of the journey and we fell in love. But that doesn't mean we'll always be traveling together. At some point, everyone has to find their safe harbour. I'd always thought we'd make it to the end together. Unfortunately, that's not how it turned out. What was it like when it happened? Were you sad? He looked up at the thick clouds covering the sky. Of course, it was sad, but no matter where she is and what she's doing now, I want her to be happy. Still, I couldn't understand how he could feel that way. Didn't she dump you and leave? But Momoko's still the one woman in my life that I've truly loved. That fact will never change. And the memories I have of our time together, they're all still here in my heart. So, in that sense, I'm still in love with her. I wanted to ask him why, but there was something so sad about the look of him from behind, so small under the streetlight, that I decided I couldn't say anything more. That night, for some reason, I couldn't get to sleep. I felt strangely agitated. Even in the middle of the night, I was still tossing and turning. I remained there on my futon for a long time, struggling. All of these thoughts were swirling together inside my head, filling it until I thought it might explode. They kept going around and around, these painful memories of the past, of my old life. They commandeered my mind. This is terrible, I thought. I sat up suddenly. If I don't do something, I said to myself, I'm going to suffocate here. I thought I could maybe watch TV, but then I remembered that would mean rearranging those stacks of books again first. It was 3 a.m. Nothing was open outside, no matter where you went. As I stared into the darkness, I wished I had a book to read. It would have at least been a way to pass the time. That's when it hit me. Isn't this a bookstore? I was practically drowning in books. I'd completely forgotten their original purpose because up till then, I'd only seen them as a hostile presence in the room. I turned on the light and started rummaging around, searching for an interesting book. But I had absolutely no idea how to judge which ones might be interesting. They all just looked like musty old books. I was sure, though, that my uncle could have easily picked out some that he loved. At a loss, I stood in front of a mountain-sized stack of books and closed my eyes. Then I reached out my hand and pulled out the first book that I touched. It was titled Until the Death of the Girl. The author was Saisei Muro. I had heard his name before in my modern lit class back in high school, but that was all I knew. So there in that dim room, with only the light of a little lamp near my pillow, I burrowed under my covers and began to read. My hope was that the book would be boring enough that I would fall right asleep. But a funny thing happened. An hour later, I was totally absorbed in it. Sure, there were some passages where the writing was difficult, but the subject of the book was human psychology, which is universal. The story centers around a man trying to start his life in Nezu. After spending his childhood in Kanazawa, he moves to Tokyo to follow his dream and become a poet. There he gets entangled in a relationship with a woman who is the lover of a friend and his half-sister. He's struggling in poverty with no way to support himself in Tokyo when he meets the girl in the title by chance. It's through his relationship with her that he starts to heal his wounded heart. However briefly. The main character has grown up in difficult circumstances and has survived a depressing youth, but somehow the whole story is suffused with this quiet tenderness. Little by little, I felt something wash over me, a feeling of peace that words can't express. If I had to explain it, I'd say it could only have come from the writer's fervent love for life. When I looked up, I realized the night was fading and the day was beginning to dawn. I read on, turning one page after another. That day when Uncle Satoru came around, I was still feeling excited. Usually I hardly greeted him, so when I leapt to my feet, he looked back at me with wonder. I had until the death of the girl in my hand. This book was good, I told him. How did he react? All of a sudden, my uncle's face lit up, just like a kid who had gotten a wonderful birthday present. Really? You liked it? My uncle was as excited as if it had happened to him. Yeah, it was amazing, I said. I don't know how to describe it. It hit home. I was frustrated that I couldn't come up with a better word. It hit home couldn't begin to describe the complex things happening inside me. No way! It means so much to me to hear you say that. I'm overjoyed. But going straight to Murasai, that's jumping into the deep end. My uncle was so profoundly happy that it somehow made me happy too. We talked about the book for a while. It was a joy to feel connected to someone I'd felt I had so little in common with. It thrilled me even if it was just with someone like my uncle. No, it thrilled me even more because it was someone like him. It was as if, without realizing it, I had opened a door I had never known existed. That's exactly what it felt like. From that moment on, I read relentlessly, one book after another. It was as if a love of reading had been sleeping somewhere deep inside me all this time. And then it suddenly sprang to life. I read slowly, savoring each book one by one. I had all the time in the world then, and there was no danger I'd run out of books, no matter how much I read. Kafu Nagai, Junichiro Tanizaki, Osamu Dazai, Haruo Sato, Ryunosuke Akutagawa, Koji Uno. I read them voraciously, the authors whose names I knew but hadn't read, the ones whose names I'd never even heard of, any book that seemed interesting. And yet for all I read, I found book after book that I still wanted to read. I'd never experienced anything like this before. It made me feel like I had been wasting my life until this moment. I decided to stop sleeping all the time. It no longer seemed necessary. Instead of taking refuge in sleep after my uncle took over for me at the bookshop, I went to my room or to a cafe to read. These old books held more history within their covers than I'd ever imagined. That wasn't limited to the content of the book itself. In each volume, I discovered traces of the years that had gone by. For example, on a page of Motohiro Kaji's Landscapes of the Heart, I came across this passage. The act of seeing is no small thing. To see something is to be possessed by it. Sometimes it carries off a part of you, sometimes it's your whole soul. At some point in the past, someone reading this book had felt moved to take a pen and draw a line under these words. It made me happy to think that because I had been moved by that same passage too, I was now connected to that stranger. Another time, I happened to find a pressed flower someone had left as a bookmark. As I inhaled the scent of the long-ago faded flower, I wondered about the person who had put it there. Who in the world was she? When did she live? What was she feeling? It's only in second-hand books that you can savor encounters like this, connections that transcend time. And that's how I learned to love the second-hand bookstore that handled these books, our Morisaki bookshop. I realized how precious a chance I'd been given to be a part of that little place where you can feel the quiet flow of time. As a result, I became pretty knowledgeable about the writers we carried. Before I knew it, I had become close with our regulars too. When Sabu realized something was a little different about me, he revised his earlier impression of me. "Hey, Takako," he said, "you're getting into it, aren't you?" There was one more change. I started taking walks around the neighborhood. It was right about the time when the weather had turned properly cool, the perfect season for walking around. Day by day, the leaves of the trees along the streets turned to gold. It delighted me to see how well the changing colors matched the slow transformation happening inside me. As I walked around, I saw the neighborhood so differently from when I first arrived in Jimbocho. Now, the whole place felt like the setting for an adventure. It was exciting. In any case, there were so many places I wanted to stop and check out all along the avenues and back streets. It had such a strong downtown feeling, this little section of second-hand bookstores and coffee shops and foreign bars. And yet, despite all that, there was nothing about its atmosphere that was chaotic in a way I couldn't stand. The whole neighborhood felt distinctly calm. This is where I finally realized that even though we call them all bookstores, each store has its own totally distinct flavor. They're divided by their various specialties. Some sell only novels, some only foreign literature or historical novels. There were even shops that dealt only in film magazines or children's books or Edo-era texts bound in the traditional style. There were all kinds of store owners too. Some were stubborn old guys like my uncle, but there were also younger ones with gentler dispositions. I stopped by the Welcome Centre one day, and they told me there were actually more than 170 bookstores here. Like my uncle said, it really was the world's greatest neighbourhood for bookstores. When at last I was tired from walking, I would stop at a coffee shop to rest. The warm coffee was perfect for the chilly season. Drinking a cup at the end of my walk, I felt relaxed to my core. I spent day after day this way as we went deeper into autumn. I have no doubt that my new routine helped brighten my mood. Things were still knotted up inside me, but it felt like the more I walked, the more they loosened up. Perhaps as a result, it was at that time that I started to get to know more people around the neighborhood. I became a regular at the Saveur coffee shop and started to get very close with the owner and the staff, especially with Tomo, the waitress. Tomo was a first-year grad student in Japanese literature who was working at the Saveur in her free time, and sometimes she came to the Morisaki bookshop as a customer. 2 years younger than I was, she looked quiet and reserved, but deep down she was fiercely passionate. As you might expect of a grad student in literature, she had an incomparable love of writers. That wealth of knowledge was one of the things I admired about her. Around this time, Tomo started coming by the store on her way home from work, even when she wasn't looking to buy anything, and the two of us would go to my room on the second floor and have tea together, surrounded by books. The first time she came into my room, she lit up. This place is amazing. It's like a dream, really. It's so small and there's no gas range. Since I was the one actually living there, I gave her my candid opinion. At least when it came to convenience, the place really had nothing to recommend it. "Are those things really that important?" Tomo said, looking like I was the one who didn't get it. "Not a single thing here is superfluous. You reach out your hand and the books are right there. Isn't that wonderful?" "I guess so. It's true," she said as she brought her face close to mine. Her eyes shone. I looked around the room again. It was strange. Somehow her excitement about my room transformed the place from being dull into something wonderful. She suggested that we could make the room even nicer by buying some flowers at the corner florist. We arranged cosmos stems in a vase and placed it on the low table. The room felt so much brighter afterward. From that point on, I always decorated that spot with an arrangement of seasonal flowers. One day, as we were really becoming close, we were drinking tea together and I suddenly decided to ask her something. "Tomo, how did you get so into books?" She answered me in that same gentle voice. "That's a good question. When I was in middle school, I was painfully shy. I had this fear of telling people what I thought. And because of that, there were just these terrible feelings rumbling around inside me. I was carrying around this awful shame. That's when I read the copy of Osamu Dazai's Schoolgirl. That's how it started for me. Now I'm basically totally addicted to reading. I think every serious reader at some point in their life encounters a book like that, and they never forget the experience," I said with admiration. "Here's hoping we both encounter some wonderful books in the future," Tomo said with a smile. "I hope so," I said, agreeing with all my heart. Afterward, something else happened connected to Tomo. Early one afternoon when I was tending the shop by myself, Takano, who worked at the Savure, came by. I hadn't had many chances to talk to him because he worked in the kitchen, but it was hard to miss his lanky figure inside the shop. I noticed him right away and said hello. Takano bowed and greeted me, but he seemed restless as he wandered the shop looking around. What an odd guy, I thought. "Anything in particular you're looking for today?" I asked. "No, I'm, not," he muttered incoherently. What's going on with this guy? I wondered. His face was all red. He was acting just like a little boy in front of the girl he had a crush on. That's when it hit me. What if he was interested in me? I remembered that when my uncle had told him to take me out on a date, he'd gotten extremely embarrassed. As I thought it through, I found myself suddenly getting nervous too. The awkward silence inside the shop dragged on for a while. The air seemed to get so thick with it that it was getting harder to breathe. When I couldn't bear it any longer, I opened my mouth to say something, but at that very moment he said in a loud voice, I braced myself automatically. I assumed he was about to confess his love for me, and so my mind was racing, wondering how I could delicately turn him down. But what he actually said next wasn't what I was expecting at all. "Does Miss Aihara come here a lot?" Takano's face turned bright red as he spoke. "By Miss Aihara, you mean Tomo?" "That's right. She often pops in during her lunch break from the coffee shop. What do you two talk about?" At this point, my fever broke and my anxiety subsided. "Wait, do you have a crush on Tomo?" I asked. "No, it's not that. It's fine. I mean, Tomo is really cute. But since you two work together, I'd think you might know her better than I do." "No, I'm in the kitchen. She's in the dining area. And I'm terrible at talking to people." "So it seems. You really are shy, aren't you? Does she have a boyfriend?" The tone of his voice as Takano asked the question suggested this was a matter of the greatest urgency. "Well, now that you mention it, I've never asked her. But Tomo is a really cute, likable girl. I wouldn't be surprised if she did have a boyfriend. Would you be able to casually ask her for me?" "Why would I be the one to ask her? Why don't you ask her yourself?" You two are good friends, Takako. You could ask her in a way that felt natural, right? And besides, I've never talked like that to a girl before. You're talking to me right now," I said, rather taken aback. Didn't I count as a woman? But Takano didn't seem to notice my reaction. "I'm not asking you to do this for nothing. If you agree to help, any time you come into the coffee shop, I'll pay for your coffee refills." And with that, I wrote off all of his many offences. My face lit up. "Really?" I asked. "In that case, I'll come every day." "Every day? That might be a bit much." "Why do you sound so stingy? You'll be getting close to the woman you've been longing for, all for the mere price of a cup of coffee." Takano nodded reluctantly in approval. "But please promise me you won't mention a word of any of this to her." "Understood," I told him, thumping my chest. And that's how Takano and I entered into our secret agreement. I learned that he had secretly been in love with her for half a year already. But in all that time, apparently, he hadn't done more than say hello to her. He'd spent the whole time off in the shadows thinking to himself how wonderful she was. That might sound weird, but you could also see it as innocent. Having taken on this role, I wanted to try to make things work between them, if at all possible. Tomo might think it was none of my business, but Takano seemed like a respectable young man, albeit rather shy and awkward. If I gave them a chance, I thought, it might not be a total bust. So I worked hard, not for the free coffee, but for the good of those two young people. The first step was to gather some information on the sly. I came to learn that there was no boyfriend at present, and it seemed there was no one in particular that she had on her mind. Her favourite colour was Prussian blue, her favourite animal the dormouse, and her favourite neighbourhood was, naturally, Jimbocho. All of this seemed perfectly in line with what I knew of her, but it felt a little bit creepy that Tomo didn't know what was really going on. Having obtained this new information, I proceeded to the Saveur, where I passed it along to Takano over a cup of free coffee. I leaned over the counter and whispered, "It looks like Tomo's favourite animal is the dormouse." That's amazing," Takano whispered back. Unfortunately, this led to the surprisingly nosy owner starting the false rumour among the regular customers that Takano and I were together. What's more, all my hard work on behalf of our young couple proved totally useless. Takano, whose role was crucial, was not making any attempt to start a conversation with Tomo, which meant we were making no progress at all. He'd let out a victory cry when he learned she didn't have a boyfriend, but at this rate, it was going to take a decade before he could even start making small talk with her. It would all come to nothing. I was getting impatient myself. There had to be some way to get these two talking. I thought of everything. And then good news arrived from an unexpected source. One afternoon, when Tomo and I were enjoying a quiet cup of tea, she told me about the Used Book Festival. Used Book Festival? What's that? I said, dumbfounded. You don't know about the festival, Takako. Every year in the fall, all the used bookstores in the area set up an outdoor bargain book market. So many people come, the whole neighborhood feels crowded and lively. It's incredible. Oh, wow, that sounds fun. Your uncle's doing it too, of course. Really? Yeah, all the stores join in. I felt embarrassed that my uncle had never said a word about this major event. I vowed solemnly to exact my revenge on him later. "I'm thinking about going this year," she said. "Do you want to walk around together?" At that moment, I had a flash of inspiration. "Yes, let's go, I said, jumping at her offer. There might be a way to take advantage of this. I should tell Takano.